and I will start off with introducing myself. My name is Brian Barnett, and I am the Director of Engineering and Public Works with the municipality. And what we have is about a 20-minute presentation here for you that will cover off the draft active transportation plan, and will be available, myself and other staff here, if you've got any questions, and we'd be happy to spend as much time as you'd like to go over any of the questions that you've got. And so what I'll do is I'll just take you through an overview of the active transportation plan, and we'll just take it from that point. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. The first point that I wanted to just touch on really is, what is an active transportation plan? And the bullets here really just discuss it. It's a framework to improve pedestrian, cycling, transit, and in Central Saanich's situation, we also have traffic safety. This project has been underway for about 2 years at this point, and it started off with as a lot of complicated projects start off, a little bit slow just to get the plan in place and the project goals clearly identified. And then we brought on a consultant team and basically got the resources available to get the project going. The project involved extensive community outreach, which I have got a couple slides, and I'll touch on that as well. And through that whole process, we have an excellent understanding of what the active transportation concerns are in Central Saanich, and what we believe some good solutions are to address those concerns. So what is an active transportation plan? In Central Saanich's situation, it really embraces all of those elements. The next question I want to sort of throw out here for the group is, why did we do an active transportation plan? Knowing what it is, why did we do it? It's a lot of money and a lot of staff time. An active transportation plan was a real, obviously a clear priority from the community and from council. There was evidence to support that in terms of our 2019 citizen satisfaction survey, which is a survey we put out to the community every few years. And part of the questions that we ask residents is, what's important to you? What's your biggest concern? What's the most important thing in terms of improving living here in Central Saanich? We also more recently, subsequent to 2019, have undertaken another survey and engagement process through our 2021 budget process. And that again reinforced the strong interest from residents for the municipality, for the local government, to make significant improvements in terms of active transportation planning. And as I mentioned earlier, that there's been a lot of community outreach through this project. So there's been several sort of confirmations that this is a top priority, both with council and with the community. Just another sort of preamble slide here. What are the benefits of active transportation? And I actually really like this slide. I think it's one of the most important ones in the slide deck that we're going through right now. Obviously, there's increased safety when walking and cycling and rolling. A more accessible community, which is a really important point. Huge health benefits with active transportation, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I think this is one of the more important elements of active transportation. It increases basically the livability of a community. It allows people to say hello to their neighbors and while they're walking down the street, and people feel less isolated and more connected with residents and the community. It's a great way to save money, active transportation. It's a lot cheaper to build bike paths and sidewalks than it is to build a road. So it's a great option to building big roads. and obviously reduce noise, pollution, congestion. All of those elements are part of what an active transportation plan brings to a community. Like all good plans, this one has a vision statement and identifies the goals that we're trying to achieve. So our vision, as identified in the draft plan, is that Central Saanich Active Transportation Plan will enable people of all ages and abilities to walk and cycle throughout the community while respecting our unique character and heritage. We've actually had a lot of questions over the past couple of weeks about what does that mean, unique character and heritage. And maybe the best answer I've got just briefly on that is you know, and we all know this, but just to state the obvious, Central Saanich is a gorgeous community, great agricultural reserves and farming, and that's what we want to embrace. We want to embrace what exists here in Central Saanich, and we want to avoid the downtown Victoria situation where roads are really getting realigned significantly in terms of placing cyclists on the sides of roads with barriers and all sorts of other traffic lights and things like that. So we want to blend in active transportation to the character of the municipality here. The project or the plan also has goals, and those are identified as walking and cycling, improved transit, safer streets, and again, you know, sort of a tip of the hat to the local character of the community. As I'm talking through this, if you've got any questions, you can type them into the chat option here on this online presentation, and we're going to keep notes of that, and we can come back to your questions as well. So if you've got any questions, feel free to just type them into the chat feature, please. All right, I mentioned that I wanted to take a minute and just talk about the stakeholder engagement or the public engagement process that we had for this active transportation plan. And just sort of high level, this by far, I think everybody in the municipality here at the municipal hall agrees that this was, you know, maybe successful is not the best word, but that's the one I like to use, was the most successful engagement process that we've ever undertaken. We had over 600 suggestions from the public. We had another 500 people put pins on a map, identifying areas of specific concerns. We engaged a panel of subject matter experts, so people like ICBC, the police, BC Transit, the CRD, and others. Stakeholders were also involved, so organizations like the school board or the Ministry of Transportation participated, and a lot of this was taking place not really in the public realm, but they were taking place behind the scenes. So kind of for every public meeting I attended on this subject matter, I probably held another 4 with stakeholders or subject matter experts or other interest groups. I really like this slide that's on the screen right now. Hopefully you can see it fairly well. What we had, I mentioned people put pins on maps, that sort of thing. We collected all that information, and each pin is represented by a little bit of orange, and the more dense orange, the more concerns there were. So you can see there's a big orange dot right at Mount Newton Crossroad and East Saanich Road. So that's a 4-way stop just near Municipal Hall over here. Obviously, that's an area of concern, and looking at comments, that's primarily around, well, a number of things: safety, pedestrian safety, no bike lanes, a bunch of concerns around that intersection. So this is a really powerful visual that we have available for us. Just a good summary. Oh, what's going on here? Let's start my video. Okay, I've started my video. Perhaps you can see me right now. I'm tired, I haven't had dinner. What is happening here? Okay, the top 5 items, no big surprises. So this is a little bit of an effort to make a summary in terms of all the public input that we received. More paved trails or multi-use paths, more transit, basically, more sidewalks, more cycling network, and improvements to intersections, pedestrian crossing, signals, lighting. So that is a little bit of a theme that I sort of, well, we picked up on as we were going through all the hundreds of comments, and nothing surprising with those comments or that summary there. It's just consistent with what we were looking at before. Hopefully that's consistent with what your expectations were. So with hundreds of meetings and comments, survey results, what we did with all that information is we took a long project list of several hundred ideas, and we started to sort through that and started to look at, well, how do these projects, what's a priority? How do they align with our project goals and our vision? And what we ended up doing was listing those hundreds of projects against about 11 different criteria. And I'm just showing you what the criteria are right now. And we ranked all the projects, I think there was over 400 of them, against things like community support. So was a project broadly supported from community plans? So our official community plan, the sort of the redevelopment or re-enhancement of Ascension Village, the other network plans like BC Transit were considered. Safety, does the project support the safety concerns that we've been hearing about? We looked at the anticipated use. So that really means, is a proposed project sort of between an area where people live and an area where people go. So let's say between a residential area and a school, or a residential area and a retail sector, like the Brentwood Bay shopping area. So we looked at things like that. We looked at the level of support basically from you, the community engagement process and other policies and plans that we have in place. And another criteria that we thought was quite important was, how does the proposed project look at connection? So one of the things that we heard was there's a lot of gaps in, say, a bicycle path. It starts, it stops, it starts again, so there's gaps. And does this address some of the gaps in the network? We also considered partnership. So is there an opportunity to partner with, say, BC Transit or the Ministry of Transportation or North Saanich and Saanich in terms of coordinating projects? And project cost was also a consideration. And that was an interesting exercise looking at how we find value for a project, but it basically came down to, what's the cost per square meter or linear meter, and how many people would use it, the infrastructure if there was a project that was approved. So we went through and we prioritized all the input based on that criteria. And I want to share with you what the results of all that turns out to be. So I've got about 3 slides here, 2 or 3 that show pedestrian upgrades and the key projects. And the next slide has a little map of this, is the Wallace Drive and the Willow Way area. So this is just near Stellies High School, and Willow Way is that path that goes through Neighbor Flats. And basically there's a great path that takes school children out to Wallace Drive, and there's no crossing infrastructure in place. So it'd be a crosswalk at that location. And part of that is that if we're bringing school children to a crossing, then there should be a crossing there. And in particular, this Willow Way path is mid-block, and there's no intersections anywhere close to it, so cars can pick up speed, and it's on a bit of a bend as well. So we don't want to have school children in the middle of the road and a car coming around the corner. A second component to that really is just connecting the future crosswalk with a future path that would basically parallel in behind Willow Way and connect into the path that the Stellies High School has. So that future sidewalk would be sort of in behind that new bus shelter that was constructed about a year ago. We're also looking at filling in some sidewalk gaps on East Saanich Road, and this is north of the new Generations building, just sort of close to the Polo Park development that was built a couple of years ago. So there's a few gaps in the sidewalk there that we want to address. We're talking about a pathway in Brentwood Bay, a new pathway along Hagen Road, and that would be basically between Wallace Drive and heading down to the waterfront. There's also several sidewalk projects proposed for Wallace Drive. There's 4 projects identified, and these are to address areas such as the Dandelion daycare. So there's a sidewalk that goes from Brentwood Bay partly toward the daycare, and then it stops. So it's, for example, addressing that gap there. There's a priority for another crosswalk in Ascension Village. And you'll recall that we built one a couple of years ago near the post office, and this one would be on Wallace Drive, close to the Thrifties area. So that's been identified as well. There is a new sidewalk connection at Ascension Crossing, and this is down near Keating Elementary. And this is a map that identifies everything that I've just mentioned there. And there's a few other elements shown here as well, but the yellow really identifies some of the key points that we had just discussed there on that list. So you can see that there's the new pathway on Hagen Road. There's the new crosswalk and sidewalk here at the north end of Willow Way. There's some more sidewalks located just up at the north end of Ascension Village. And the next slide is cycling upgrades. So there's less proposed improvements in terms of bike lanes here, but they are just as powerful, I think, in terms of making some improvements. These top 2 address Mount Newton Crossroad, and what they're proposing is a off-street multi-use path that would basically go from Ascension Village all the way down to Lochside Trail. Also, Wallace Drive bike lanes have been identified, and these are really to connect Ascension Village and Brentwood Bay. Some further bike lanes along East Saanich Road, just near Wallace Drive, and several bike parking improvements as well. So more bike storage and covered bike storage at municipal parks, libraries, various things like that. And this is the drawing that shows the bike lane improvements. And you can see there's really 3 big ones. So the bike lane through Ascension Village, a bike path or multi-use pathway from Ascension Village down to Lochside Trail, and then addressing the gap between Ascension Village and Brentwood Bay. The bike path on Wallace Drive is proposed as part of a sewer project that we've got a grant application submitted to the provincial government. And as part of that project, we'll build a sewer pipe. Does not yet exist, but along Wallace Drive, and it would basically go from Brentwood Bay to Centennial Park. And as part of that project, we would be able to resurface the road so that there could be a bike lane. It's a very big project because we actually have to shift the road to the north. There's that large drainage ditch to the south, so we can't shift it to the south, so we have to shift the road to the north. And that's an expensive undertaking. With respect to transit, just have a couple of bullets here that I wanted to address. The transit is considered in part of the active transportation plan, but is limited to infrastructure. And so what we've identified is about 15 different bus stops that should have shelters or improvements for accessibility, lighting improvements, that sort of thing. And so it focuses on infrastructure improvements within the community. And I want to note that as a separate initiative, BC Transit is undertaking a review of the services. So that's the routes, the hours, the frequency of service, the hours of operation. And I'm participating in that, as well as many other people throughout the Saanich Peninsula. And so we're undertaking a comprehensive review of transit service for Central Saanich, but it's separate to the active transportation plan. The reason that we didn't look at services and routes as part of the active transportation plan is because it has a big rippling effect. So if we were to make a change in Central Saanich, it would have a rippling effect to North Saanich or Sydney or Saanich. And so that has to get looked at, more of a comprehensive process, as opposed to just the active transportation plan for Central Saanich. So that's underway, and that'll be underway for the next about 6 months. And there'll be engagement and a lot of input opportunities from residents on the peninsula with respect to service changes for BC Transit. I wanted to take a minute to speak to Keating Crossroad as well. And that has not appeared in any of the priorities. So I wanted to basically answer some questions that are probably going through some people's minds at this point. So let me just make a little adjustment. Keating Crossroad is the busiest road we have in Central Saanich by far. And it's a truck route, and it's those two ingredients really make it an undesirable location for active transportation. Predominantly because of safety concerns with all the large trucks and turning movements and all the driveways in that location. So as opposed to, the only option really is take out that center lane and split that surface area to 2 bike lanes, one on each side of the road. But even with that in place, the fact that it's a very busy road and truck route still exists. So what we're really looking at in terms of the active transportation plan is, let me just bring it up, is an alternative route. And the alternative route is basically here through Maber Flats. And what we're looking at doing is there's a couple of unbuilt road allowances that we have through there that basically go from Brentwood Bay to Oldfield Road and even potentially to Van-Ness. And that would parallel Keating Crossroad. And that is what is proposed, not as a priority to be done in the short term, but a longer term option for connectivity between Brentwood Bay and the Keating Crossroad or the Keating Business Park. And so looking at the property that the municipality owns, there's potential for a multi-use path that would connect Brentwood Bay into Willow Way and into Keating Crossroad area there. So that's the option that's being discussed in the active transportation plan, as opposed to trying to make Keating Crossroad a location for active transportation. So that's largely a summary of the active transportation plan, but I still have another couple of slides because I really want to talk about what we're doing now and what we're going to be doing later in this year. So it's all well and good to have a plan, but I know people are eager to see some results right away. So I wanted to share with you what we've got in the budget for 2021. We've got about $22,000 that is allocated to make some of the bus shelter improvements that have been identified in the active transportation plan. The bus shelter improvements are done in a partnership approach with BC Transit, where the local government does the infrastructure upgrade. So that's sort of the concrete pad or a link to Sidewalk. So that's our $22,000, and generally we can prime about three bus stops to be outfitted with bus shelters provided by BC Transit. So our $22,000 could likely prepare 3 bus stops for bus shelters, and BC Transit will provide the bus shelters. Bus shelters cost about $30,000, so they'd be contributing about $90,000. I mean BC Transit for bus shelter improvements versus our $22,000. The other project there is a grant that was announced a couple of weeks ago, and that is part of a economic revitalization grant that the province has put out to help with the economy due to COVID. Our grant application was to build a multi-use pathway on Benvenuto, and that would be between the intersection of Wallace Drive and the western terminus of Benvenuto, which is the Butchart Gardens area and the provincial park, the Todd Park that's down at the end of the road there. So that funding is approved, and actually today we've just released an RFP to get consulting proposals to do the engineering design for that. We expect the design process will be about 6 months, so we're hoping to start construction late this year, and it would take another 6 months or so of construction. So the pathway, maybe even a bit longer, 10 months, let's say. So the pathway will be constructed by the end of 2022. We also have a very exciting grant application of over $1 million, and that's to address several of the active transportation priorities in the school zones that were identified through the active transportation plan process. And so that would be improvements to the Keating Elementary, the Bayside, the Brentwood Bay Elementary, and the Stellies High School. So the Stellies High School component would be the crosswalk that I identified earlier in the slide deck here. And next steps, what I just wanted to mention, and we also have our Director of Finance online here if you've got any questions that you want to pose from a financial perspective. But later this year, what we're intending to basically do is take all the projects that are a priority for the active transportation plan and blend it into our asset management plan. Our asset management plan really is a sort of a 20 to 50 year look at what infrastructure needs to be constructed, what infrastructure needs to be replaced, and long-term financial planning associated with that, which may involve borrowing, it may involve debt, it may involve building up reserves and proceeding with projects once basically cash is in the bank and we're able to proceed with projects that have no external funding requirements. Sustainable asset management planning also has to do with what I've just talked about, which is receiving grants and proceeding with projects based on a partnership approach with either grants or other bodies like BC Transit. The staff is already working on the integration of the active transportation projects into our asset management plan, and we'll be doing that over the next 6 months and bringing revised asset management plan forward to the public and council later this year. So right now we've got a great plan, but it hasn't been integrated into our municipal finances is basically the point there. And my last slide for you before we go into the Q&A really focuses on getting your feedback. We have an online survey, and if you're not aware of that, please take a look. It gives you the opportunity to answer specific questions that we're interested in. You can also, through the survey, if you've got questions that you want to discuss with myself or anybody else, you can contact staff. The survey results will be shared with council, so that's why we're sort of directing you to that venue to just kind of formally record what your opinions are, your thoughts are. And we also have, if you haven't seen it, a nice 12-page, it's about 12 pages, I think, summary of our 100-page active transportation plan. So it brings out all the key points, sort of what I've just been touching on over the past 25 minutes or so. And that's my last slide. So I think I'll just stop there and Britt can join us here.
Okay, so hi everybody, my name is Britt Burnham. Sorry, I was trying to introduce myself at the beginning there and I was having some AV issues. So I manage community engagement for the district, and I'm really happy that you were all able to join us tonight. So we have quite a few questions and I'm going to try and combine some of them into topics for you, Brian. And the first topic is going to be about transit. So could you talk a little bit about what you know from BC Transit about when the engagement is going to take place around the Saanich Peninsula Transit Plan?
Yeah, it's called the Local Area Plan, and that was launched about 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago. We've had 1 or 2 meetings prior to the launch of that, just to get consensus in terms of what some of the key issues might be. And then we've had sort of 1 meeting with is basically the engineers from myself and from North Saanich and Sydney with BC Transit. So that's taken place, and we've got a little bit of a project plan that's being described at this point. And to answer the question, we're expecting, I think, June period, and it could start May, it could finish July in terms of the public engagement. I'm looking at the project plan. I'm thinking BC Transit might be a little bit light in terms of the public engagement, and we might come back to the public towards the end of that assessment and the analysis of service changes, hours, frequency, that sort of thing. And I for one think that there's a good opportunity to come back again with and engage the public when, like what we're doing with the active transportation plan, when there's a draft service adjustment document that's being prepared. So that would be late fall, I think, maybe perhaps even early winter of this year. So there might be a couple of touch points where the public could get engaged in that process.
Okay, and as soon as we know, we'll be promoting that on social media and our website, and trying to get the word out to the community. So is there money in the draft plan for the park and ride over and above the bus shelter budget?
The park and ride, which park and ride? I
think the Saanich Exchange, and there's another question about the Saanich Exchange. Is there any thought being given to adding a public washroom there? Okay.
Tackling the first question first, there has been no suggestion throughout the active transportation process about a park and ride near the Saanich Exchange, which is, just to be clear, is near the intersection of Mount Newton Cross Road and East Saanich Road. But we are looking at trying to get park and rides down by the highway. And I'll just take a minute to elaborate on that. In addition to reviewing the local transit service, BC Transit is also launching a rapid bus, they call it. And that's a bus that will basically be going up and down the highway between BC Ferries and Victoria. And we will be reconfiguring the intersection of the highway at Mount Newton Cross Road and putting new bus shelters on the highway. So it'll be just near the overpass on each side of the highway, so northbound and southbound. And the idea is that people will be able to take that rapid bus down to UVic or to Saanich or to Victoria or north to Sydney or to Swartz Bay, and a few stops, rapid transit. And I'm mentioning that because we are talking about a park and ride to support that rapid transit, so that if you're a resident of Central Saanich, you can just drive down to the park and ride, park your car there and take the bus all the way into Victoria. And then when you're back, you can just jump in your car and do the 1 or 2 kilometers home. So there's talk about a park and ride down at the highway area, but not in the Saanich Village area.
Okay. And Brian, who determines the upgrades to the shelters, the district or BC Transit?
It's combination. The district has a strong lead in that, but it's a combination of BC Transit, and it's really just driven by numbers. So we've got really detailed records in terms of how many people are getting on which bus stop, how many people are getting off which bus stop, and it's all prioritized in terms of, that's a bus stop that has a lot of people using it. There's no shelter, so it's at the top of the list. So it's a simple math.
Great.
And there's a few other factors that float into it, and it's generally around property. Do we have enough property and area to build a bus pad and a bus stop at that location? And if it looks good, then it's on the list.
Okay. And Brian, could you talk a little bit more about safe routes to school and the role that played in developing the plan?
Yeah, safe routes to school is a project that is led by the CRD, and it's a very interesting process. Their process is to engage a lot of stakeholders. So the project team led by the CRD includes the CRD, the school board and the individual schools, which include maybe the principal and the PAC. It includes me or the district of Central Saanich, includes the police and ICBC, and there's probably another stakeholder or two that I can't think of at the moment. But the process really is a fairly wide open process. There's a little bit of a framework to help all these people have sort of organized conversations. But it really is identifying what are the concerns at a school, and also what do we think the solutions are. And the CRD has great resources in terms of stats. So they know that if you're within 5-minute walk to a school, you're probably going to walk, you're not going to drive. If you're 10 minutes, well, there's a few people that will choose to drive, and 15 minutes and so on. So there's sort of perimeters around schools that are identified. And then if there's housing developments within those perimeters, that's great. We focus in on that. We also look at other things like, obviously crosswalks, sidewalks, small little locations for, the kiss and go, drop your kids off at school. Maybe you don't kiss your kids as they're going to school, but just thinking of the airport where you've got a 30-second or a 15-second drop off for a student, and they then walk the 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes to school. Doesn't have to be right in the school parking lot. And then at the end of the day is a very comprehensive report. It recommends a whole bunch of different things for all the different groups that participated in the process. What generally falls to the local government or Central Saanich's infrastructure. And the school board might be tasked with education and perhaps crossing guards, things like that, and more of an operational nature. But it's a great report. We have a new one for Keating Elementary done in 2020. And we've got one from Brentwood Bay Elementary that was done about 2 or 3 years ago. Keating High School and Bayside, I don't believe, have got safe route to school reports done yet, but I'm sure it's on the list. Well, I know it's on the list for the CRD to evaluate those locations as well.
I'm going to jump back to one of the last questions. So when we were talking about that park and ride, I'm wondering if it was the Ascension park and ride. It was actually the SBA's bike facility that they were working about.
Okay, perfect. I'm happy to give you a little update on that. That is in our budget. It was supposed to get done last year, but there were some issues that arose. Primarily, the bike shelter was going to be sitting right on top of major CRD sewer pipe. And so that just added a little complexity in terms of assessing how that could be accommodated. It meant a complete redesign of the bike shelter, and that design is now complete. And just today we're getting prices to do the foundation work, and the design for the shelter is complete. Foundation design is all complete. So we're really just in the process of hiring some contractors. So that I promise Mayor and Council will do that this year. So we'll have that underway this year, and that'll just be a large covered bike shelter with a bike rack where people could lock their bikes up, and it'll include a small repair station, and there'll be a little bit of finishing that'll take place that's not organized just in terms of landscaping. Our parks foreman will go in after the construction is complete and just do a little bit of a cleanup of the area afterwards. We might end up with some wayfinding signage, route finding signage, that kind of thing happening afterwards as well. But that's all scheduled for this summer.
Great. And I think you touched a little bit on the washroom question. The person was just following up on it. I know Saanich Village Public Washroom was also identified in the Saanich Village Design Plan. So it is something staff are aware of. But I don't believe there's any plan in the near future that I know of.
Yeah, I sort of skipped that question. So with respect to a washroom, that was never identified in the active transportation plan, and so there is no proposed washroom as part of the active transportation plan. But just, as a side comment, we know that washrooms are important. There is the washroom down at Lockside Trail near Mitchell's farm that was removed, and there's an outcry, and it was put back about a week or two later because people need washrooms. And they're through, as Britt has just said, through the Ascension Village design review and some visioning for Ascension Village, it's been noted that public washroom facilities are in demand and they're in short supply. But that would be looked at, I think, through development projects. So if there's some retail sector, like the new store going in with stores, there might be a public washroom requirement for a store, sort of like you'd see in a shopping mall, but not part of active transportation. It's a bit separate.
Thank you. So there are a couple of kind of related questions here around the timeline for implementation and financing the plan. So I don't know, Troy, if you want to jump in, or Brian, if you want to start off, but if you could speak to what is the timeline for implementation, and what is the strategy for financing? Would you consider looking at other department budgets, redirecting maybe the gas tax, other types of funding that we currently have at our disposal?
Sure. Perhaps, Troy, you've been good enough to spend another evening at the office here to participate in this. Do you want to perhaps comment on that, and I can pick up if there's areas that you'd like me to touch on?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. I'll talk about the financing, and you can maybe touch on the time frame of the plan. You summed it up nicely earlier, Brian, regarding our current asset management plan, and that we're updating that this year. The previous asset management plan didn't foresee this plan coming in 2021. So that plan really just took into replacement of assets that were existing within the municipality. And that's what our taxation level supports. So this being a new plan, again, we're updating our asset management plan later this year to incorporate this into it, along with some other factors. So although we do have, a little bit of reserves and our existing capital spending to get these projects started, Brian's indicated a couple there that already have grant funding that we're going for, and we will try and move that for the next 1, 2, 3 years, take advantage of grant funding whenever we can. But at the end of the day, this is a extensive long-term plan that requires funding. So I would expect we'd bring back from the asset management update financial plans and strategies for council to consider and get public input on how the public want to fund this. Because the bulk of the funding for active transportation will most likely come from taxation. So it's how quickly we raise that taxation and how we save up that money to pay for projects over the medium and long term that'll help determine the success of the plan. Other municipalities have done the same thing, and I think Squamish did a plan a few years ago where they increased significantly because the community wanted it to start building up money to pay for those projects again over the medium and long term. So that's where things are. It's a new plan. We're addressing the financial needs through the update of the asset management plan, and those will be introduced and discussed with the public and council later this year.
And then just add
Brian, you can speak to the implementation of a plan. It's not a 3-year or 5-year plan. It's you can speak to how many years or decades this plan may look at.
Yeah, it is a long-term plan. Absolutely. The implementation timeline is really going to be, as Troy said, it's going to be determined by the residents here, and we'll be contacting through surveys and other methods. How much do you want to pay to implement this? And if people are interested in a 1% tax, a 2% tax increase, so that revenue can come in and we can proceed with the projects, great. We're also going to be, rest assured, looking for opportunities to partner. And a great example is that multi-use pathway on Benvenuto. When the government came out with economic stimulus funding for tourism, we all met here internally at Municipal Hall, had the conversation, thought that, yeah, we could respond to that grant opportunity. And so that allowed us, it's $300,000 of free money, allowed us to make a significant move right away on dealing with what is a very high concern in terms of safety along that road there. So we're going to be continuing to partner with the Ministers of Transportation, with the CRD, with BC Transit and provincial government, with any funding opportunities we've got. But as Troy said, the bulk of the funding for local governments is property taxes. So that's going to be the consideration that we'll be looking at over the next 8-10 months while we review our asset management plan. So I can't come up with a project schedule that says we're doing this in 2023, this in 2024, and this in 2025. It's under review right now.
Great. Just a couple more quick questions about the financial component, and then we're going to try and answer a few questions about specific projects. So someone has asked if AT will be built into the budget as a line item, and I believe Troy is going to be a line item in future budgets so that people can see how much is being invested in active transportation specifically.
Well, we're not there yet, but I would imagine that could be the case. How we come forward to council and the strategies and what the public wants. It is an important initiative for the municipality. So eventually that funding may be an individual line item tax return. I think that's a good idea. But again, it's too early for that. It really depends where the community and council want to go with the financial strategies for the plan and how aggressive those look.
Mm-hmm. I think,
and I'll just speak to that as well. The budgeting process for municipalities is highly regulated, and so we don't always have a lot of choice in the matter. And what I'm sort of introducing is that sticking with that Benvenuto pathway or the upgrades to the schools that I mentioned in terms of grants or bus shelters, we can have individual lines on specific projects like that. But a lot of the work as well is not easy to distinguish in terms of a budget. And a good example of that is is line painting. So we've got about 100 kilometers of road in central Saanich. And if we were to reconfigure some of the lines to accommodate a bike lane, let's say we construct a kilometer or we repaint the line so we've got an additional kilometer bike lane, our budget isn't going to show 99 kilometers of paint for roads and 1 kilometer paint for a bike lane. It's all under one contract. So that's just an example where a lot of the time active transportation investments on our part don't appear and can't appear in our budget. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So we've got a bit of work to do around that, as Troy was saying. It's still up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we'll jump into some specific questions on projects that people don't see in the plan. There's probably many more that we can answer before 8 o'clock. So maybe if we could just provide really brief answers where possible. The first one is if we considered a dedicated cycling path on the west side of the Pat Bay Highway between Tanner Road and Sayward Road. And there are a couple other questions about the connection over in Tanner and the highway. So if you could speak to anything about either active transportation and the flyover connection or pedestrian cycling crossing around Tanner Road.
Okay. The first question about pathway on the west side of Pat Bay Highway south of central Saanich, no, we didn't consider that for a couple of reasons. That's outside of our jurisdiction. Even the section that's within the central Saanich is Ministry of Transportation property. And we never had any suggestions throughout the entire consultation process to construct a pathway along there. But kind of reading between the lines on that question, it's saying, you know, how does somebody, say in Tanner Ridge, get to Lochside Trail or a cycling path? The flyover does not have any cycling infrastructure. And I'll explain that in just a minute. But what is being done as part of the flyover project is looking at where a crossing for pedestrians and cyclists could be constructed somewhere between Island View and Sayward, which are the two existing crossings. And the Tanner Road area, or the Tanner Ridge area, is almost ideal from a number of perspectives in terms of, well, that's kind of the best spot. So there's an assessment underway right now that's being done in conjunction with the flyover project to basically figure out, well, where would something go in the future, and so that's underway at this point. I just want to mention, I know we're getting tight for time, but very quickly, the flyover doesn't have any cycling infrastructure because Keating Cross Road doesn't have any cycling infrastructure. And, you know, sort of one of the rules with transportation is, in this situation, is you wouldn't take cyclists off the Lochside Trail over a nice new crossing across the highway and dump them out into a truck route where there's no cycling infrastructure. Just be irresponsible with the Ministry of Transportation to put cyclists in that sort of situation. So, and there's other reasons, but that's one of the key reasons why there's no cycling infrastructure with the flyover. And we're looking at, you know, okay, if it's not going to go there, we still need something. Where's it going to go? And that study's underway.
Thanks. Brian, right behind the Saanich Fairgrounds, there's a trail. It runs along White Road. Are you familiar with that little trail? It's not very well known. I've lived here for 20 years and I just discovered it recently. So maybe we can get back to these folks about their question. It was just around extending that trail a bit further because it could potentially connect into Breckland from Saanich.
Okay, yeah, I'd have to look at a map, I think, to understand that question.
It's a very pretty little trail. So we'll follow up with that question. The next one is about sorry, this one's I think we've answered that. Would you consider paving Willow Way which is the connector from Stelly School through, I'm just saying this for everyone on the call's sake, from Stelly School through to Keating Cross Road.
Yeah, paving is not in the plan, but you know, one of the criteria that we're looking at was accessibility, and a paved surface is a lot better surface for accessibility purposes than a gravel surface, especially a gravel surface that might have potholes or ruts that maybe doesn't get a lot of maintenance done on it. So, and there's always a trade-off. A gravel surface is much better for the environment because it has the ability for rainwater to permeate into the soil and recharge aquifers. Asphalt sheds water and yeah, it goes into the soil, but usually you've got a little bit of erosion issues and things like that associated with asphalt, and plus the greenhouse gases associated with manufacturing asphalt. So it's always a trade-off. There's never any, you know, perfect answer to any of these problems, but yeah, I would love to see a paved surface along Willow Way, and if we do build the other connection that I mentioned in the Neighbor Flats area for a network connection, if that's paved, that'd be great as well. Probably not affordable in the short term. Well, it's not affordable in the short term because that paving Willow Way would probably cost $300,000 or $400,000, and that route already exists. It would just be a slight improvement, really. So why would we spend the $300,000 or $400,000 there versus creating a new safer crosswalk by a school or a shopping area where there's some safety concerns? So not happening in the near future, but yeah, I would love that.
Brian, have you spoken with Saanich at all about a connection to interurban rail trail?
Yeah, we have, and they've got an active transportation plan that sort of speaks about working with Central Saanich on connectivity with cycling routes between the communities, the Oldfield Road area. Ours speaks exactly to the same thing, and in fact, over the past week, just by coincidence, I was having some conversations with the municipal engineer in Saanich just about that. So yeah, that one's embodied into the active transportation plan as well, from both communities.
Okay, great. And the Benvenuto pathway, would it be wide enough and surfaced correctly so that horse riders could share that trail?
I don't know. I really don't know a lot about horse riding, to be honest, but I will answer it this way, that the trail will be about 2 meters wide, and it will not be right next to the road. It'll be about 10 feet into the bushes, plus or minus. It's going to kind of meander through the trees. So it'll be a nice experience just using that trail. We're hoping that it will be asphalt just for accessibility purposes, but there's always budget challenges, and it could be a very fine little gravel, pea gravel that is packed down so it mimics the sort of asphalt surface, but it wouldn't be quite to that standard. And I would imagine horses could enjoy that as much as anybody.
Great. And Brian, I'm going to ask you, I think just one more question here, and then the other ones, maybe we can follow up with these individuals, but there are a couple questions about speed reduction and management. Could you speak to that as part of the road safety component?
Yeah, so you may have heard about a speed reduction project or pilot project that is under discussion, and I'll just take a minute to tell you how that works.
Brian, sorry, just before you jump into that though, these questions weren't actually about the reduction project.
Okay.
But I see where you're going with that. They were just about in general speed management in the district.
Sure. Okay. So let me try to answer. Well, that's a question. Let me just answer that question. So whenever we get complaints about speed, we take them seriously. We've got those little tubes that go out on the road, and we deploy those. We don't do it over the winter because if there's any snow, the snow plows take them out. But for about 10 months of the year, 9 months of the year or something, we will deploy these traffic counters, collect data in terms of speed, and look into any concerns. And so we've got a really good database and a map that has all the speeds throughout the community, and great summary reports that show sort of every hour what the average speed is, the maximum speed, the minimum speed, the medium speed, that sort of thing. And usually in response to any speed concerns, the police are right out there. They'll increase patrols, they'll put up radar. We also have some mobile speed signs that flash, red, and they show your speed, and we'll deploy those and make a presence. And that tends to address the concerns. We haven't needed to move into traffic calming situations here, but that's certainly always an option.
Troy, did you have anything else you wanted to share that you haven't been able to answer yet, or?
Is that to Troy?
Yeah, that was to Troy.
To Troy.
Otherwise,
just unmute myself there. No, thanks, Brian. That was great. And I see there's lots of questions in the Q&A about financing and where the projects and things. So as I mentioned, there's some active transportation that we do on an annual basis. We've done some recent trails and things like that, but the bulk of this active transportation plan funding, we don't have it yet. So the plan is first, we're working on a financial plan this year, and this time next year, we'll have a clearer picture of how we're going to fund the plan and what that will look like. And my contact information is on the website. If anyone wants to contact me, give me a call. Happy to discuss.
thank you. And please do email any questions that we weren't able to answer to activetransportation@csaanich.ca. And all of our information is on the website as well. Brian, was there any last comments that you wanted to share?
Well, just thank you, everybody. I'm not sure how many people are online, but it's really great to see interest and participation. So, if nobody showed up, I would feel a bit disappointed for sure. So I just want to thank everybody for spending an hour of their evening with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Brian. I'm sure it's not easy answering all those questions right on the spot. There's a lot of projects that people want to see in the plan, and I know that you've worked really hard with Urban Systems and the rest of the team on prioritizing them. And you're so well versed in so many of these little projects. It's really impressive. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you all for joining us. And again, feel free to reach out with any more questions after the session. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.